What's up, everybody? Continuing in our conversation around colleges. This time, we're going to talk about those quote unquote elite colleges and who got access and why or why not on the other side. Welcome, everybody. See, I set him up. I was like, David, when I come right back, you taking it. I got the big screen
let's
on
go.
You.
Let's go. Let's go. I'm ready. I'm ready. I was multitasking. Good afternoon,
David. You all good?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cole. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the South Star Classroom. My name is David Castillo, and we are on episode 121, continuing on this path, this theme that we've been talking about throughout the history of the show. But we did a college focused show last week, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper. We have a new report that we're going to break down, and we are going to have a conversation about this. So thanks for being here. We are missing Omar today. Apparently, he is in he's at a conference somewhere. We're not going to disclose his location just to make sure that he's safe. But hopefully he's well. And let's start with check-ins. We are like right kind of in that middle, holiday to holiday kind of zone. Things maybe are starting to slow down a little bit, or maybe they're not. And the world seems to be going off of the rails. So with that, let's do a check-in. We're going to start with Dr. Cole. How you doing, Dr. Cole?
I'm doing. I have been busy work stuff. I have some travel next week. We have the memorial. I will be hosting a memorial this coming Saturday at my home. So getting ready for that, and it's moving along pretty well, and learning a lot about my aunt that I didn't know. Like, for instance, this is my aunt that I know for being out here. She graduated from Castlemont High, David. Like she from the town. For y'all that don't know, Castlemont is a high school in East Oakland. But anyway, I'm learning little tidbits like that. I'm enjoying it. I'm as much as one can, and I'm excited about today's show. I'm gonna be the everyman on today's show. I don't know the study, I don't know the articles. I'm just here to engage, and I think that should make for a fun show. So I'm looking forward to it.
Sounds good. Jubilee, how are you?
I am present. I'm present, and I am currently standing in gratitude.
For the person, David, and I want you to check in, but for the person that loves check-ins, the person that wants to get in there and be mushy with feelings and stuff.
Here we go.
I'm just saying, this is your this is where you shine. This is your moment. You're gonna be all right. Do you talk about it?
Maybe call me after. But no, you see, that's like when people go, oh, your name is Jubilee. So like you're always supposed to be prancing like a ballerina everywhere. And it's like, there's different forms of joy. So it's like I have a continuum. So today I am standing in gratitude. Right before, like maybe 20 minutes ago, I got it kind of like shifted and threw me off. So I'm trying to just regain my posture of gratitude and joy and just be present in the moment. And I'm looking forward to an amazing show, and Charles cutting me off, and Charles all right, love you, Charles.
Oh man, did somebody's microphone get muted? That's crazy. I don't know how that happened.
You need to give David all the controls.
David got it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are doing good down here. It's I just took the dog out for a walk. Got a little workout in, and it's like 80 degrees. It's kind of ridiculous. But trying to get to that holiday spirit. putting like
Yeah, that's real ridiculous.
putting
terrible.
sunscreen on. Yeah,
We feel so bad for you, man. You know what we had
Yeah.
this morning? We had snow flurries. It was great. It was, the snow it was
No
all
idea what
covered
that
in
is.
white. And then it
Yeah.
rained, so all the snow went away. But so now it's just ice and slush. It's great.
Yeah.
And I have a puff vest on in the house, but you're gonna be okay, 80 degrees person, because we feel very bad for you.
We'll be okay. We'll be okay.
All right.
Before the show at our pregame kind of check-in, I was sharing with Jubilee and Charles. The school that we're at down here, my son is in the 8th grade, and it's a very big school. It's like 1,500 students at a middle school, which I think is just on paper is kind of not a good idea. Maybe in theory as well, but it's been a pretty good experience. Now he's in his 3rd year there, but there's definitely, I think there's fights, violence happens in schools, right? It comes in from the community. It comes in. A lot of it is like I think a lot of the violence that we see in schools now is the result of still kids emerging from a couple of years of being shuttered at home, and like kind of that lack of socialization and other things that come along with it. And then you tag on to it the social media stuff. Fortunately, like my son is not yet on social media, so he's kind of has blinders on, where other kids are, they're on all the apps, and that's where stuff starts, and then it ends up at school, right? And so I think yesterday they had like 5 physical altercations at his school, and I was like, okay, I'm waiting to receive an email from the school about this. There's no way this can just like skate on by. And fortunately, they did send a message out. But unfortunately, and they've since clarified, they did say that they were going to be partnering with the local county sheriff department. And I'm just like, I think it's a school culture issue, right? Having police on your campus is not going to prevent fights. The fights will probably still happen. Then you'll just have young people getting arrested. Police are not trained to deal with adolescents, even though they might say they are. But they retracted that part, and after getting some people involved, said that they were going to only be engaging with them for some of the online out of school activity. So that's good, and hopefully today was a better day. But it took me back to like my time. So I was actually working in schools when MySpace first came out. Right, I'm a dinosaur, and so we had to deal with that like head on. We didn't really know how to. We figured out how to address it, but this is like back in whenever MySpace came out, we would have like fights on campus, and we're like, how did this happen? How does a fight happen like before school? Because there's all this like online beef, and the kids come, they're ready for it, right? It's nothing that happens at school. It's like it's all set up, people know. And eventually, we got pretty smart about talking with kids and their social media profiles, and we didn't violate any confidentiality, but sometimes we'd see a social media account, and we bring the parents in and have the parents look over the information, and it's like, you say that your child is not involved in gangs, yet here is their MySpace page that's dripping in red or dripping in blue, right? Meaning they're either a norteño or a sureño, right? Like a lot of like online gang activity that then shows up to the school. It was a whole new world for us. So point being, I hope that schools are better. I know that most schools are likely better equipped to deal with those things now, but it's like one of the issues with social media. Even if kids don't have schools and phones in school, all that social media stuff still exists before and after, and it can cause a lot of problems during the school day. So, a note to parents out there is to, as long as your children are minors, you got to monitor their online activity. Yeah.
Well, all just aside, I hope everything works out, man. I think that, that's, I went to, like I was telling you, I went to Westlake Junior High, and it was all kind of fights, and police be up there, and all kind of stuff was happening, and it was, it was the Wild Wild West. So we'll see how it goes.
What would the police do? What would the police do when they came up? Like, what was it? What would a typical?
Well, I would say, like, people didn't do as much when they knew that the police was there, that they were coming, but they would just go somewhere off campus after school, or something would happen and we all knew where the spot was. And I mean, we was in full transparency, we was running towards those fights and kind of trying to see what was happening. And we had a very athletic vice principal who was, I think his name was Mr. O'Leary. He would just you just see that brother running. If he running somewhere, it's a fight. So I don't know how much instructional coaching principal. Or I don't know why he went to college for instructional stuff, because all his job was to break up fights. So but
I mean,
it's
you've worked in schools
and
dynamic. Jubilee's worked in schools, and so we know, like, they don't teach this to you in admin training. They should, but there's a particular way that you learn to move physically in a school when there is an emergency, right? Even if there's like a fire or something, the principal should never run, but the principal needs to, be able to like walk very quickly without, showing the appearance of any kind of panic. It's an art form, right?
Unless a kid getting suplexed on his head, but yes,
yes. I'm sure Jubilee's done that. Jubilee's done that walk before.
Yeah, listen, that
quick walk. You're like,
I don't remember. I know that I restrained children when I was pregnant, like very pregnant. So I had to do what I had to do to protect myself and to protect, it depends on, on them walkie-talkies, depends on how the call comes in. If it sounds like people dying, I'm going to do more than skip to my loo. I'm going to run to get to the classroom. So I think I did a mixture. I think I ran, hopped, I skipped. I used my voice, my black mom voice, because that works in schools. Hey, stop that! Get him off that wall! Give him back his pants, like whatever. It's a mixture. Let me not say never. There's probably been one school that I've worked in, either taught in or led in, that didn't really have many fights, but the school population was, a bit smaller, and there were way more adults. So when that ratio changes, but for my whole career, I have broken up tons of fights. I have gotten injured. I got spat on, broken. Listen, and I still came back, so I chose to go back and teach and lead where I was raised, on purpose. So I knew what I was doing.
Yeah. This is the last comment, and we'll move on to the topic, although it's related. The last school fight that I broke up in a high school was probably only like 4 years ago. And it was definitely, 4 years ago, it's like kids are filming it, right? So the kids were sending me clips. They're like, hey, here's a clip of, like, now I'm on social media stopping a fight. I think somebody hit me in the head and whatever. I'm like in the mix, maybe we'll watch those videos in a future show.
maybe. And I have Bareback and Body should be a sponsor of today's show, but I am out of Bareback and Body. So this is going to be a fun episode. Let's get it going.
All right. Okay.
I got a whole bunch of old basketball injuries, and they like to come back at the same time. This is all good.
Yep.
You got it.
So we are going to move on, and we're looking at a new report that just came out, and I don't want to get into the details or the weeds of the report. So I'll just share kind of a summary of what this report. And I appreciate the people that run this organization. They're a research kind of think tank, and they just do kind of like snapshots. They do an analysis of a particular thing that's happening in K-12 or even pre-K or in college, and they put out these detailed reports with recommendations to leaders, to politicians, to organizations. And so we're talking about the Ed Trust, the Education Trust. They're a national organization. And they did a recent study that looked at enrollment trends for African-American students at selective private colleges and universities over a 20-year period. So from 2000 to 2020, right? Regarding enrollment, what they found was that there was an increase in African American student enrollment at 75% of the institutions. So 3 out of 4 of these institutions showed an increase, even though the increases were small. The increases were small and did not align with the African American demographic in those home states. It's kind of confusing because, especially with private schools, people tend to like jump states and attend, schools. So mapping it out to the local area might not be a good way of looking at it. But small growth in most of the schools. The report also shows a consistent underrepresentation of African American students at these colleges, especially concerning given the bans on affirmative action that we talked about here in California, Prop 209. Let's see, what else? The report also stresses that increasing racial and ethnic diversity on campuses leads to a better racial climate and enhances student success, right? So, I worked at a charter school where, we literally had, about 300 students, and we had 3 white students and probably, 30 African American students, and the rest were Latino. And that's difficult if you are in the minority of students in a school. That comes with the whole other list of issues, just trying to feel safe, feel included. It can be very difficult when you're looking at those kinds of numbers. And then we're talking about elite colleges. Many of these schools have huge endowments, right? So they've got money in the bank. And we're talking about financial constraints. So it seems like, there's money there. And the question is whether, that money is being used to take down some of those constraints. And then lastly, the report also notes that addressing the underrepresentation issue requires more than just money, right? Pointing to the systemic issues in higher education. So systemic issues, systemic racism, other kinds of barriers and challenges. So those are my big takeaways from this report. Essentially, very, very measurable but small progress, and still a lot of work to do, right? I think to put it bluntly. We're not gonna necessarily go into the Latino data, but we can assume that it's similar. So, given all of that, wanted to see what your take is. I don't know if you've read it or if if you have any initial thoughts to share about what I just shared. This is our question. We can jump into this if you're ready. So how does having fewer African American students at top colleges affect their daily life and their chances beyond college?
Can we get just some clarity just real quick? So the general thing that you got, and again, as the every man on this episode, right? Mm-hmm. Are you saying that there was a study, and what the study was showing is that less Black kids are getting access to the elite colleges, and the report gives some reasons why or some rationales or whatever, but that's the central theme. Is like, even though Black kids are having more access to college in general, you're having less access to quote unquote elite colleges like the Ivies and stuff like that. Okay, I just wanted to be very clear for the people listening.
Some progress in most of the schools over the 20-year period, but also the overall numbers are still not representative of the local demographics, right? Yeah. So there's still a gap between the percentage of African Americans enrolled in these schools versus the percentage of African Americans that live in that particular area, right?
Okay. All right. So, I just wanted to get some clarity on there. Julie, if you wanted to kick off, I just need to get clarity first.
Yeah.
I'm still formulating my thoughts. I was here just looking at how many Ivy League students are low income, because I'm thinking about race, but I'm also thinking about people that are poor, right, or living in poverty. How many of them are getting into these Ivy League schools? And I'm sure I'd have to go way down the rabbit hole to find, how many poor white people get into Ivy Leagues, how many poor Black people get, right? And then figure out what the disparity is between those numbers. But InsideHigheredEd.com has a stat that says the class of first-year Ivy League students in fall 2021 consisted of 13,634 undergrad students, according to the report, but only 2,524, or 18.5%, were recipients of federal Pell Grants, which is aid for low-income students. So I want to keep digging to find out, like, well, how many of those students were Black? And that question came to mind because it's like, if they are struggling to even admit low-income white students, then the low-income Black students, right, or any Black student is like off the radar. Like, when do we even get to them? And then I was thinking, for us, by us, where's LL Cool J's clothing line? Can we turn that into a college? Because I feel like that's the only way we're ever gonna level the playing field or keep leveling the playing field. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah,
Charles,
I think
you got?
I mean, I'm listening. I think it's like, I'm not surprised by it. I mean, I know there are some large systemic things that's happening there, right? Like when you look at, like, you know, it mentioned Prop 209 in the report. I don't know if people are familiar with Prop 209. It was big legislation in California that just a lot of things came from it. But when you got rid of things like affirmative action or whatever, it just, you know, the people that got access to these things plummeted and went down. I think we see these things a lot. I guess my question would kind of be too, like, I mean, look, I mean, the general reaction is this, man. I'm Black. I applied to different type of schools. I didn't apply to every school that I wanted to go to. That was just my own belief, like, detriment at that point too. Like, I mean, I'm pretty sure I could have gotten to UK, University of Kentucky, which is my favorite school since I was a kid, but I didn't even apply because I didn't think I could do it. I went to what was kind of easier and that I could get into. So I think there were some things around my mindset and just some systemic things and some cultural things that kind of played into me not going for what I needed to go for. But I think that, you know, these schools have, if you white and your parents went to that school, you got a really good chance of getting in. I think we don't really talk about legacy and stuff like that. I don't know how much if everything was fair, I don't have necessarily an issue with legacy, but when a particular group of people have been blocked out for so long, you don't get to raise up that legacy piece. Like, I'm too many first Blacks in my life. Like, I was a part of the largest Black cohort for my doctoral program. Like, I'm like, just the fact that we still making a lot of Black history in those type of ways. I mean, it might feel decent in a moment, but when you reflect, it's like, damn, there's still like a long way to go. I think also as a critique on university system as a whole, like we've been talking about, and I'll stitch this in, is where is the interest in college at this point as well? Like, so if it's like, yo, I think there are a lot of people that look like me that are looking at things outside of college. I'm having to have where I used to get booked to talk about how to get into college and what it is when you're there. I'm getting asked by similar groups of, is college still worth it? And I think that is starting to shift the zeitgeist a little bit too. And I think finally my critique on a lot of these schools is I think a lot of these schools are actually losing, you know, their rigor. I think when MIT students are basically saying that the math is too hard and math has been math since math, you know, I think that's I think there's a cultural thing happening where there has been somewhat of a coddlement of the student in general. And it's interesting that even with that coddling, even with that lowering of standards, that Black people and brown people still seem to be iced out of it. So there's a lot of things that I'm noodling on. You know, I think there's a lot of strands to tap on here, but I'm trying to even hone it so we can have a good conversation about it. But it's so, you know, I didn't go to an elite college. I went to, we missing the cat that's brown that went to the elite college. I went to state schools because I knew I could get in. They said if you got a 3.0, SAT scores and ACT scores don't matter, and you got a spot promised to you. So you know what I did? That's what the hell I went for. You know, and even with my test prep, I did okay. I mean, in my school, I did okay on the SAT. Nationally, it was dog shit. So, you know, and I think that while that could be systemic, I also think that my school just had lower standards for its students and kind of pushed us through. So I think there's a lot of feelings and emotions and places to point to all around. But that's my initial jumbled, barely legible thought.
All right. So let me throw this in there. So we've talked.
Did you get your thoughts? I don't know if you gave yours at all.
Me? No, I'm good. I mean, I'm gonna try and move us along here.
Okay.
So in the report, another statistic is in 2000, 6 of the top 10 Black student access scores. That's how that's their methodology, right? Were held by historically Black colleges and universities, right? HBCUs. And so in 2020, that number jumped to 7. So I think one of the things coming out of this report demonstrates that, I think going back to Jubilee's point, like the 4S bias, is that the importance of looking at HBCUs, and also on the Latino side, looking at Hispanic serving institutions, because we know that those schools that have a particular focus generally get much better outcomes, meaning like they're admitting more and they're also graduating more students than the non-HBCU or the non-Hispanic serving institution. So I think it just takes us back to like what we've always talked about, and again, we're talking about elite colleges. We're talking about for every 100 kids that graduate high school, and remember, like that's only 100. Not every kid graduates from high school. Right. So you start with 100 that start 9th grade. Maybe 70 of them graduate. Of those 70, maybe 40 of them go to college, and then you start chipping down. So like for every 100 kids that start 9th grade, at the end of 7 or 8 years, you maybe are graduating 20 if on the high end, right? And what happens with all those that aren't included? But what this shows is that the HBCUs are generally more effective, and we talked about it on another show. The Hispanic serving institutions also have stronger numbers. So I thought that was interesting.
I mean, those schools are like determined, right? Like there's a mission that's inherent in their existence, right? And so with HBCUs, like it's like, yo, we were built for this, even though we're not discriminating against anybody else. There's a lot of white kids that actually go and Hispanic kids that go to HBCUs. And when we were doing that research, David, you should probably just inform the people about, those Hispanic schools. It's a status. It's a little different than the HBCUs, but it's a federal, Why don't you explain that for the people?
That's about as much as I know about it. It's a federal program
designation.
Designation. Yeah. That and it has to do with I think a couple of things. Obviously, enrollment. They look at programming, and then they look at the student outcomes, right? Graduation rates, things like that. Yep.
So it's got me thinking about like what even are like employers looking for now. I think at least back when I was in school, going to an Ivy League was like, you want to be a powerhouse somewhere. Like you want to be a Wall Street, tycoon. You want to be selected or hired by like a top law firm, in Manhattan, things like that. So it's almost like you were being groomed so that could be your end result, and then I just Googled, which companies hire from Ivy League. It says Google was the top employer for every Ivy League school. Amazon, on the other hand, was the top recruiter from just 3 top colleges: the University of Florida, Boston University, and Northeastern University. And that's from collegerover.com. But like, I just find it, I find it interesting. It's like, who's really got their eye on students that are in Ivy League? Like, who still cares? Like, which professions still care. That's one, right? And then two is like this whole world that we have that revolves around social media, right? I think has changed the game in terms of how people move to places of notoriety and visibility, and even getting coined as an expert in something. We got, and I know people like, oh, you're like a social media success, overnight success, or you just had high virality on TikTok, but you don't really know what you're doing. But that has been proven to be untrue so many times. And so it's like, so what are employers really looking for? Are they going for Ivy League folks? Or are they looking for a specific skill set? And if you've got that plus a college degree, it don't matter if you went to a state college or Ivy League. If you got that skill set and you can help us, raise our bottom line, we're hiring you, and we do not care. It's just my question.
Yeah, I mean, the world has definitely changed. And I think the way that I think it's interesting too, Charles. I mean, you're saying the people that you have historically partnered with and worked with and gone and engaged with young people and in other organizations, like what they're asking you to come in and do is like different, right? That says that something is changing something has changed. The world has changed, right? And so part of that is, like, what does the actual package look like, right? Part of it is going to be, some part of it's going to be education, some kind of degree, certificate. But then there's whole other way of like moving into the world and kind of being validated. I mean, I think social media can be a positive force if it's used appropriately. And the resume, I think, is the resumes already look different, but I think in the next 5 years they're going to look incredibly different. I think employers are Jubilee's right. Employers are looking for a very different skill set, right? And I think it's just going to continue to change, right? And having a liberal arts degree is like, not necessarily, like, I think intrinsically it might be a good thing, but it can open some doors for you, but it's not the same thing that it was like 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, even to what you were just saying, Jubilee, I just wrote down liberal arts, and that's what I think that a lot of things are watering down. I think that we have to be talking about what type of jobs and in what areas, right? Because I still think that if you're doing like a hard science, if you're doing like math, if you have like a hardcore STEM type of career, I do think that those names still carry a lot of weight. You know what I mean? I actually think that like I know it does. You know what I'm saying? I think even with me having a doctorate, it's different to have a doctorate from San Francisco State in education leadership versus like having that same degree from Princeton or from Harvard, and how you kind of get looked at and how you get, brought in. But I think the other thing, like, I think this question makes us ask a lot of questions. I think Julie and I both are kind of doing that. I think the other thing to point out, and we didn't go into Latino, Latina X, Latin. I don't want to offend nobody, or Hispanic. I do think that brown population is growing. Brown population is growing while black population is staying stagnant and less concentrated. What do I mean by that? When I was a student in Oakland in junior high, as the time that we were talking about, when David was teaching and still in the classroom and running schools there, it was a black majority city. There was a concentration of black students. Now, there hasn't been a drop in black people in the country, but they are now more spread out. I was a part of that great Negro migration from Oakland to Stockton, or, there's no centers like that. And I think Brown is actually going the opposite way. I think now Oakland is becoming a majority brown city, in this country will be a majority brown country. I think you got to talk about that stuff, because I think it's like, okay, where we used to placate to certain groups, or we felt like we had to reckon with certain groups. I think white people are preparing for the proliferation of brown people. And I think that brown is so diverse and there's so many that there don't have to be a singularly like voting block either, right? So you see a lot of variance in like there's brown Democrats, there's brown Republicans, there's brown independents, whereas in the Black community, you're starting to see that, and especially if you look at Chicago right now with this migrant situation, which we should probably talk about at some point because it's happening in real time, but it's still taboo in most of our communities if you are a Republican or going against certain establishments. And I think that ties into this conversation a lot, because when you have decentralized Black people and you don't have that power base, you don't have those voting blocks, you can break down things like affirmative action. You can break down things like those policies. And hopefully Jubilee likes this. This is where it becomes a grander systemic issue that it's easier to attack this group, as opposed to, I think there are negotiations that are happening in the brown community. Like there's a Marco Rubio, and then there's like, you know, a liberal like brown person. And I think it's just
the Castro brothers. Yeah,
exactly. Right. I think it's just a very interesting dynamic that's playing out. I hope that made sense, because we're in the midst of it.
It did.
So I'm making sense of it as it's happening.
I mean, so just to you made me, so the population, I'm just looking at California, right? We'll talk about California. Right. That's where I'm at, but I know it's growing everywhere. The Latino population, like we are now the majority, right? We've tipped the 50% scale in California, and students in schools. So like that's clearly happening. So Charles, you were talking about like how the growth, you know, Latinos are you know, I don't know what the birth rates look like, but probably higher birth rates than other groups, right? And so population's growing, changing what cities look like. It's changing New York City. It's changed Chicago. It's changing Oakland, San Francisco, LA, obviously. I mean, everywhere. DC, right? And so and at the same time, so you look at like the demographics are shifting. There's all kinds of like, you know, political fallout as a result of that. But when we look at, I looked up some high school graduation rate information, and it's pretty fascinating. So for Hispanic and Latinos, and just like 2 years ago, the 2019-2020 school year, the national graduation rate was around 83%, right? Which is pretty high. I think I'm like scarred after having spent so much time in a city that ran a school district where the rates were so much lower, right? 83 sounds high to me. However, we still lag behind most other groups in terms of attending and graduating college. So in California specifically, you know, Latinos have a much lower rate of college education. That's just the data. And so looking at census data, only 11% of Latinos in this particular region called the Inland Empire, like San Bernardino, right, east of LA, had a degree, right? And that's insane. Across the state of California, it's only 35% and 33% nationally. So yes, the numbers are growing, but you know, our what's happening to us regarding education and access to education is not. So that's that gap that we keep talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Jubilee, what do you for Jubilee? I was like, I want to jump in. I wanted to
go for it.
Take up too much air.
No, go for it.
I mean, I think again, like I think that's just a good point. I think that there are groups that are dwindling. I think the white population is thinning, and it's thinning in a lot of different places. And I think that when you can decentralize, like it's interesting that the report is called Segregation Forever. What is segregation, right? It's like, you know, at one point it made sense to segregate and put all these Black people in one spot. But that made a lot more sense when they couldn't vote. That made a lot more sense when they couldn't, like, you know, build companies or whatever the case was. Right now, in the proliferation of that, now you get things gerrymandered. Now you get, you know, the Tulsas like destroyed. Now you like there's a power base, and even in like, you know, if you look at Oakland, where we're from, David, like, well, you're from saying, but you know what I mean? Like West Oakland used to be District 3. It was District 3, and it's like that's a lot of Black people at that time. That was the last like Black section. So you know what we got to do? We got to add Adams Point, which is like a larger white population, a younger population, or it's either white or young people of color. So you don't have that black voting block. And I just think that there has to be, because our numbers are so small, because we only dance in between that 12 and 14% number, we have to move more as a block than other groups do. Or we have to figure out the solidarity kind of missions that like Chinatown does in Oakland or anywhere else in this country. Like their dollar circulates. And all this does kind of like placate into this place, because when UC Berkeley says we'll give out, they had the Gates Award, the Gates Millennial Scholar. What that was in California, if you didn't know, it was basically Bill Gates for these type of communities. The top like performer in your school has a full ride to a UC. You know what I mean? And it's like, so it looks like there's this progress in black students getting into UC Berkeley and UC Davis, but it's really just one. Like it's truly just one. And we took these notions to be progress when progress wasn't truly happening. It was, we're gonna let in a few people. And that's why you still got Princetons and Harvards and things like that, where there's a cap on black people, but the perception works so well that Asian people partnered with white people to sue about Harvard because they felt that black people were taking up those spots. And now we see, now that the smoke is clearing, well, y'all still not getting into those slots in those places. But these white kids that got legacy, where it don't matter how smart they are, it doesn't matter how they did on these things, you get a huge boost if you are a legacy kid. So, I mean, I'm trying to think of solutions, right? But I do think, I think there should be a different proliferation of HBCUs. I think that they should not just be in the Midwest, the Eastern Seaboard, and the South. I would love to see these type of schools happen in the West Coast, or these partnerships happen, so we don't have to keep fighting. Like, it's like blood sport if you a black kid trying to get into these schools because they got a few slots for black kids per se, or EOP or EOPS. And we battling each other, and it's just our numbers never grow. And I think that that's just, so when you ask this question, it's like, well, man, I do think it still means a lot for these top private colleges. I do think that it still carries some type of pride and prestige. I do think that it hasn't lost all its cultural clout yet, you know what I mean? And hopefully it doesn't, because I actually am somebody who believes in higher education. I believe in the exchange of ideas at a top level, especially now in a world where social media is so proliferated that it's hard to find truth in anything. So if we don't have institutions that's at least teaching kids how to think critically, I think we're doomed. And I'm seeing universities lose their own academic edge. I'm seeing them succumb. Like, that's the whole purpose of tenure. So you can actually always teach the truth and teach from that place without worrying about, losing your job. But I think we have to talk about the proliferation of social media and our society and how things are shifting in order to really start tackling this. Because again, when you at MIT and you can't do math, that's a problem. And black kids still can't get in. So it's like, it's such double and triple jeopardy, man. And I just did a big stretch. I'm curious what Jube was gonna jump in and say.
I mean, you always talk about like the legacy piece, and I feel like that might be a part of the solution if they actually add some level of accountability. That's the thing. Like, we're talking about these private institutions that are able to fundraise, are able to get money from Tom, Dick, Harry, Mookie, all the people, right? Probably not Mookie, but and just not have to be accountable for that. There's nobody looking and saying, "Oh, that's so-and-so's father. No, we can't take funds from him, or if we take funds from him, his son can't be admitted into this school." Or what? There's no parameters, right? One and two. I just think, like, over and over again, I just think it's communicating, hey, we really don't want y'all here. Like, y'all want to march and protest and make all these different, like, laws and stipulations. Or we don't want y'all to go here. We didn't make these schools for y'all black and brown people, and we don't want you to go here. And I just feel like, when do we just say, you know what? Like, how do we get the education that we provide at HBCUs and state colleges and all of that to a level that's quality? Like, the prestige is connected to the name, right? It's like why if you go to a store and you see somebody selling a Psyche sneaker, you're like, I'm not getting Psyches, I'm gonna get Nike. Like, what is this? Like, right? Like, people want the name, right? But just because, and I don't have facts on this, right? But like, I wonder, whether or not the education is, matches the prestige of the name. Like, I remember, graduating from SUNY New Paltz, there was a friend of mine. She got accepted into Downstate, SUNY Downstate, which is in Brooklyn. It's like a medical what do you call it? It's like a medical program. So you graduate, or you could graduate from high school at the age of 18, and then you go to this program at SUNY Downstate for 7 years, right? You do all your medical work so that you can be an MD at the end of that 7 years. It was, at the time, I don't even know if it's still going on, right? But it was one of the best programs in the country, for that. And one of the only ones in the country that would allow you to go straight from high school and just start on your path to becoming a doctor, right? And they produce solid doctors. So it's like, is it the quality of the education that these private institutions, these Ivy Leagues, are providing, or is it the name? And if it's the name, then like, what are we even talking about? For a name that doesn't want us there, that doesn't make the space for us to come there, and then you don't necessarily provide a higher quality education. It's the name, right? Like, and
it's the name, but and I think money's tied into it. Oh, go ahead, I'm going to cut you off.
No, I'm just saying, like, and I get that name, right? Like, you drive a certain car, like you're gonna go to the dealership, you get all the bells and the whistles. Like, I get it. Like, a name does have power. But I'm saying, in this day and age where there's the messaging that, like, hey, we don't want you. There's a lot of different ways to gain intelligence and to become experts, right? Earlier, like, is it all worth it?
And they so they do provide recommendations, right? And I think that you touched on some of that. So there were 4 recommendations that were generated by this report, and they are as follows, right? We've heard this one before. We've talked about it. To develop recruitment strategies that increase access. Okay, we've talked a lot about that, right? Assess and improve campus racial climates, right? So doing the work of making sure that these colleges and universities, that their environments are inclusive. And I would say not just around issues of race, but even thought, right? It does feel like, and I've experienced this, I've attended many colleges that, felt, more like indoctrination versus like objective critical thinking education, right? And then the last 2 are and we're talking about, private schools here, leveraging federal accountability. So if they're getting federal money, there can be some kind of exchange in terms of accountability for how the schools are recruiting students, admitting students, and graduating students. And then also increasing accountability from the accreditors. And there are organizations that accredit public universities and private universities. They basically give them the stamp. You've gotten your stamp from this state or this regional or this national organization. It gives you credibility, right? And so is there a world where we can increase accountability there and put some pressure on schools to change some of these numbers? That's what came out of the report.
Yeah. So as I'm looking, I was just like, because I think a lot of this is money. And we talk about it's a lot of it's money, right? So let's the most recognizable, let's just say, as far as HBCU go, Howard is probably the most recognizable HBCU. I know, sorry, Hampton people, I'll do your numbers too. They have an endowment at Howard of $865.3 million. Hampton has $400 million. That's their endowment, right? Stanford's endowment is $36.5 billion. Like let's look at Harvard's. Harvard's endowment is $53.2 billion.
Wow.
Let's Princeton's is $37.7 billion. Like, let's just I don't think people understand the difference between a million and a
yeah.
billion. Like that, it is a drop in the bucket. It is a Hamptons and Howard's endowment combined is a rounding error that somebody probably wouldn't even go to jail for. They probably wouldn't even recognize. It'll just be like taxes would just be like, well, it was a rounding error. Like the money, like, and then not to do this. I don't like being this guy, but I'm gonna have fun being this guy.
But where does this money come from?
Built up on slavery, but
exactly
slave labor.
Yeah.
Like, so when we really want to talk about it, I'm gonna just stop there while we still got a show. And you know what I'm saying? Because I don't need my skeletons being dug up and being canceled.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean,
I'm just saying,
dollar amounts are
true.
huge, and they come from generations and generations and generations of accumulated wealth, right? That ultimately is tied back to slavery,
free
right?
labor.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
The old boys club. It's
Yeah,
to me,
man.
it's like you building a country club. That's all it is.
Oh my goodness.
We built it for us, and we want to keep it that way, and we're gonna keep it that way because when these people graduate, they're gonna give us this endowment money, and we're gonna continue to employ this whole legacy piece and let our people in. And when they get into their different, you know, whether they go into medicine, whether they go into law, whether they go into media, whether they go into tech, we're gonna always have people in those places calling the shots, and it's going to be this cycle that continues over and over again until the rapture.
It's crazy. I mean, it's just like I said. I think there's a deeper conversation. I'm gonna have to tweet that. Like those numbers, I mean, that is astronomical, and now that makes me even give these schools even more, props, right? Like HBCUs are responsible for more than 50% of all the professional Black jobs and careers in the country. Like when you understand, it's like, so now like the anomaly of me being a Cal State Hayward and then San Francisco State graduate and being able to be in this force, right? Like there's so many things that's working against you in that way. There's so many things that's there. And I mean, let's look at UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley, which is a public university, their endowment is 23 point. It's a meager $23 billion. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think it's just very interesting. Like we can have these philosophical conversations and things like that. But if you really want to know, look at people's budgets, like look at their spreadsheets. Like, and for y'all that don't know, that's not familiar, endowments is after money shit. I call it after shit. It's after everything is taken care of, the pot of money that we can just like have to build on our legacy and just save up. We might do some scholarships or something.
But not operating revenue. It's not operating income. It's just like it's there, right? Harvard.
Someone's
Yale,
at my door.
Stanford,
Y'all keep going.
Princeton,
I got to get this door. You're in control,
MIT.
David. I don't know who this is.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that are essentially just kind of sitting in coffers, right? That's very interesting. You add all that together, and it kind of takes us back to the root of the problem that we're talking about today, right?
Yep.
Excellent. All right. So Charles is checking. Do you have any other thoughts on the topic before we kind of transition to closing thoughts?
Not really. I would love for you to share what they suggested next steps should be or solutions should be, or maybe share what you feel is most viable.
Yeah, let me pull this up again. Let me see.
I'm sorry. We see as soon as we start mentioning stuff, the feds show up at my door. You see?
That was quick. That was quick.
I said, I'm gonna stop talking about the billions. My bad. I'm gonna stop. My fault. I'm sorry. I don't want no smoke.
They're waiting for you. Yeah, I mean, like so the four things again were we've talked about this, like the recruitment strategies, right? Developing better recruitment strategies, and then improving racial climates on campus, right? Those are the first two. And the second two were to like leverage federal accountability. So if you're getting federal dollars, what can the federal government do to hold these schools better accountable, right? And then the last one was, which I think is interesting, is kind of increasing accountability from the accrediting organizations. So basically accountability, right? Yeah. So I think that's what they came up with. Again, we're talking about elite colleges and universities. We could be talking about 100% of community colleges and public universities too, but without talking about the root cause, which is what happens in K-12. We're actually just talking about the kind of, I'd say, the cream of the crop, but we're missing out probably on 70%, if not more, of the young people that are transitioning into adulthood and what their access is, right? So you could probably assume, I don't know if it gets better or if it gets worse, but yeah.
I mean,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think the other thing, and this kind of complicates it, but like as the world changes, obviously education slowly responds, right? So you have more of the shift back towards like career technical education, that used to be kind of looked down upon because it was, there were certain tracking practices. But I wonder how that plays into all this now. You have like dual enrollment, where students are in high school taking college classes. I wonder how, access to like early college coursework when you're in high school. It'd be interesting to see how that impacts, how does that change your access, and then how does it ultimately change, your ability to graduate, right? Which is something that's relatively new.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
I mean, I think one, just good topic, man. I think it's a layered, multi-layered, just conversation with things. And listen, when you got me and Jubilee locking arms and busting through the door together on it, it's bigger than Nino Brown. It's bigger than Nino Brown. I need and I really wish we had Omar, because Omar it's like, these your people. We just the good thing when you got friends that went to the Ivies and these schools, like they just gotta take it, like, you know what I'm saying? It just gotta be like, yeah, I guess so, you know what I'm saying? But nah, man, I don't know exactly what the solution is, but I do think I'm just gonna lean into, here's the information, do what you will with it, like understanding that huge chasm in, like, endowment money, and that's a lot of money for an HBCU to have an endowment of. And it's like not even a fingernail. Like, it's so little money compared to, it's not even $1 billion. And they got 57 of them, and I just think that, but what do we want to do as a people? And how are we going to come together? And I'm just talking to my Black people right now, man. Like, there's a big chasm in the Black community, whether you are foundational Black or you are from an immigrant family or whatever the case is. And I'm just telling you, man, like, I hear that and I get it. I understand. But like, we just don't have them type of numbers to play them type of games. And right now, we still got to be a united block. And I don't think we are right now. And, and I look at our brown brothers and sisters, and this, and I see I know everybody got their infighting. Everybody got the stuff that they do. And I'm watching it play out with this migrant stuff. But it's enough of them. There's enough of them to where on some level, and maybe a lot of my brown folks will disagree, right? But just saying, just numbers wise, there's enough where that disagreement can happen, but we're such a fragile number of people. It's such a small, volatile group that it just requires this unbelievable, uncanny amount of togetherness and camaraderie. And I just feel like we gotta get together and start figuring that out so we can start to solve these type of problems. But we splinter so easy, man. And I don't know if this is the podcast that had that talk, or maybe I'm just frustrated as a Black man. But when I look at this stuff, it's tough. So that'll be also my final thought and all that good stuff. And I'll get out the way.
We splinter easy as well. It's like once we've had the chance to, once the door was open for us and we get through the door, many of us, meaning my brown brothers and sisters, have no problem shutting the door behind us, right? To opportunity. So the idea of the show came up maybe a couple of days ago. Did some research, and then I shared it with Charles. I'll share it with the group. I heard a very interesting podcast from a gentleman who's close to my age, maybe a couple years younger, who grew up in LA, and he's talking about his life growing up in LA and gangs, and eventually ended up, life in prison. Somehow he ended up getting paroled, and he's free. But he led a life of very similar to like my life up until about like the difference between like junior high back then and high school, right? Where I was able to go in a certain path and he went in a different path, right? So college is not even like part of his vernacular. Not to say that he's not an articulate person, because he's very articulate. But he spent, most of his life in prison. And he was like reflecting on his life and his story. And so I just think about, again, like of all of the people that I grew up in and around, how many of us finished, made it to high school? What were the factors that helped us to graduate? And then some of us go on to college, and then a very small number at the end of the day ends up graduating, right? And so right now we're talking about the elite numbers, but I'm interested. The reason I'm interested in that, because I'm actually interested in the majority that don't have that access, right? And so I think maybe for a future show, looking at that, and that goes for both Black and brown folks. And so for people that don't have access, right? If you aren't able to acquire an education, any kind of education, right? What are the possibilities? What are your life outcomes looking like? What are the percentages look like? How much money are you going to earn? What kind of housing are you going to have access to? What kind of food are you going to have access to? What kind of healthcare are you going to have access to, right? And that's real life stuff for a lot of people. So, Jubilee.
All right.
Take us home.
Miss Julie.
What do you got?
Sorry, I was muting and unmuting. I didn't realize. I need to go to DJ school. America has a heart problem, man. Like that's what I think. I think it's all about money. I think the reason, like, if they have a heart problem. They got congestive heart failure, whatever it is. And that is why the money, is not used in ways that, propel true diversity and equity. Like if these schools really wanted to, have more diverse populations, demographics, if they wanted to change the recruitment policies, they could well do so. They don't even have any like real limitations. But I think the reason they don't is because it's not a desire to. There is a mission that they have. There's a population that they're after. And they use the money to get to that population and to accomplish that mission, to keep their schools looking the way they do, to push out, the graduates that they do, to take the careers that they have. And that's that. And the money aligns with their values, and the values do not align with diversity and true equity. That's one. Two, this generation, I am not afraid for them, honestly. This generation, they can spend 12 hours on TikTok studying from other TikTokers how to moonwalk, figure out how, like, what is the formula that will get you on a plane from Egypt to the moon. Like this generation will study to become experts, like at something. We look at what they study, like, what are y'all even doing? And who cares how long you can like hold a straw in your nose and not die? We don't care, right? But this generation is, to me, they're on the cutting edge of a lot of developments, a lot of inventions and all of that, because they have this willingness to just try new things fearlessly. Right. And so I don't know. I think college has to be a part of, their lives in some ways, depending on the professions, like Charles said earlier. But I also think they're going to be responsible for a lot of breakthroughs and ways in which we do things without it. And so to the Ivy Leagues that don't want to, incorporate Black and brown people, like, screw y'all. To the HBCUs that welcome us, we love you. And as a Black person who plans to be a multimillionaire one day, I know where I would be putting my money to support, Black and brown people getting college educations.
Boom. All right. Well, thank you for that. That was a good wrap up. Okay, we are at the end. Thank you for joining us today. South Star Classroom podcast episode 121. We missed you, Omar, and
Mm-hmm.
we will see everybody next week. Thank you very much. Have a good